This is Gilbert Jalad. I'm talking to you here from Private Corporate Counsel, headquarters downtown. This is Tufts on Tax, where all your tax issues and problems are answered right here with Mr. T. Scott Tufts. You can call him at 877-647-7887, or you can email him at stufts@pcc.law. That's stufts@pcc.law. Or you can visit the website, privatecorporatecounsel.com. And if you didn't get that, we have it on YouTube on the banner in the bottom of the screen. And you can check us out on Apple, Spotify, and Google. Hello, Scott. How are you?
Good to be with you.
Good to be with you too. Now we're going to be talking about Form 4852 and W-2 today. So what can you tell the audience about that?
Yeah, so this is an interesting topic because it will be the sequel to our prior podcast on the K1 and 8082. If you remember, and our audience will remember, we've talked a lot about the K1, Schedule K1, coming out of LLCs, partnerships, and the like, and how a Form 8082 is what you utilize if you haven't received the K1 or it's in error and you're unable to fix the K1. Then if anything within the four corners of your K1 is in error, you need to file the 8082 as a substitute to fix or correct that erroneous K1, or the fact that you didn't get a K1. You need to put down what your understanding is of your allocable share of partnership, income, items, and expense, and so forth.
Correct.
So now we come to an interesting form that very few people probably know much about because of the uniqueness of the W-2. So, Gilbert, as you know, a W-2 is given by employers to employees that is for their wages and keeping track of that.
Of course.
Correct?
Yeah.
So the question becomes, what happens if your W-2 is incorrect? Or you should have gotten a W-2 and you didn't, okay? So the corollary or the parallel to the 8082 is Form 4852. But this one has some tricks to it that the 8082 doesn't. So
more tricks than taxes?
Yes. So taxes are tricky, and these forms are lethal and difficult, and you don't file them without getting awfully good advice because, as we've said over and over again, the importance is to adhere to the instructions and other things that say do not do these things, file these forms without thinking them through and what do they require, okay? So, for example, in the 8082 K1 context, we talked a lot about how you try and get the K1 corrected, and you look at your operating agreement and what it says about how you get financial data before you resort to the filing of the 8082. You don't want to do things hastily or out of reaction if you can help it, okay? Now, in the context of the W-2 world, let's say, again, we set up the same situation. Let's say you didn't get a W-2 and you should have, or you got a W-2, it needed to be corrected, you asked it to be corrected, and it's not being corrected. Got it?
Got it.
So, in walks Form 4852, and it's titled Substitute for W-2 for Form W-2 Wage and Tax Statement or 1099-R. Now, so it also substitutes for this form called a 1099-R. But my point today is we're talking about something that's going to substitute in. And it's a Form 4852. I don't know if the camera can see that, but I've got the Form 4852 here.
I'll try to put it on the screen when we do that.
Yeah, that would be great. And so what's interesting, though, is when you read the instructions, it talks about how you should always attempt to get your Form W-2 or W-2C or 1099-R from your employer or payer before contacting the IRS or filing Form 4852. That's the instructions, all right? If you don't receive the missing or corrected form from your employer by the end of February, which is now, right? We're into April.
Mm-hmm.
You may call the IRS at the number they give you for assistance, right? They give that number, okay? And you must provide your name, address, phone number, social security number, and dates of employment. You must also provide your employer's address and phone number and name. The IRS will contact your employer and request the missing form, okay? The IRS will also send you a Form 4852. If you don't receive the missing form in sufficient time to file your income tax return timely, you may use the Form 4852 that the IRS sent you.
Is this something new, or when did this come out to this process?
So this process, this has existed for some time. The form I have right now was revised in September 2020, and I've known about this form for some time. But what's interesting is, you notice that when I was reading the instructions, it said, it went out of its way to say, please try and fix it. You know, I'm paraphrasing. Try and fix it with your employer. Try and get a corrected W-2, which would be a W-2C. And if and only then you can't get that figured out, call us, right? And then the IRS will contact your employer. And request the missing form. You know, so if the W-2C has not been corrected, right? Or the W-2 hasn't been corrected and you did not get a W-2C, as I read this, it is possible the IRS will make a quick call and say, Mr. Employer, you need to provide a W-2C. That's pretty scary, right? I mean, that's not scary, but in the sense that it's invoking a process that reminds me of the SS8. It's very private, right? It's a pretty quick process here. And it makes sense because you want the W-2 fixed, right? And you need it to be fixed. But what's interesting to me is that the IRS will send you the form to attach to the return, even though it's available publicly, right? So this just gets into this idea that, you know, unilaterally filing something without thinking it through, because the Form 4852 would be an example of a form you shouldn't unilaterally file, right? The way they prescribe it in the instructions is they need to send you the form, right? So even though it's publicly available, and you'd say, well, why don't I just, in that situation, you'd say, no, IRS, don't send it to me. I'm gonna, I'll use it. I'll use my own form. See that?
Mm.
So we have to kind of understand that when we're talking about these forms and these competing forms, or the process that goes with them is much more involved than just simply pull the form out, fill it in, and file it, right? There is so much more to these situations that we're talking about. And Gilbert, we shouldn't be surprised if our tax system is got two things going on with it. The speed of life and the ease of electronics and pressing a button, but the reality that the information that's going into these returns and these forms is comprehensive, detailed, and someone's got to answer them, and we've talked about that, right? So how much review are you getting of these forms that are getting filed on your behalf, usually, or through software or whatnot, right? So I think the people in the trenches that are feeling the pain, if you will, are the accountants and tax return preparers who are stuck having to try and live in the world of electronic filings and things going with simplicity for a tax system and tax forms and data gathering that's anything but, if you understand what I just said, right? So I think at the end of the day, what we're impressing upon people is no form should be filed without some careful thought and analysis. And as part of that, you unfortunately are going to have to read the instructions to know the particulars. I've talked in the past about how courts will actually look at the instructions and it will be included in the give and take of evaluating whether you know what you're doing. And last but not least, you have competent, qualified people helping you to know whether you should or shouldn't, when, how, and what. And I think that is the message, right? And why these forms are, you know, what I say lethal, but where you have to be careful. So where we leave it today is the 4852 is not one that you should pull out and unilaterally file. You need to understand it's something that you can say, I need to get that form from the IRS because my employer is not giving me a W-2 or they're not correcting the W-2. Okay?
Awesome. You heard him, folks. Just be careful. You can call him at 877-647-7887. Again, you can call Mr. T. Scott Tufts at 877-647-7887, or you can email him at stufts@pcc.law. Again, that's stufts@pcc.law, and you can check us out on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.